Hey bitches, welcome back to another episode of Confessionals podcast. Today's topic is gonna be maybe a little bit triggering, a little bit sensitive, but it's also going to be juicy. I'm going to be talking about the time when I was in a cult. And I mean, when I say the word cult, I mean it wholeheartedly. I was in a cult. I was brainwashed and I was mentally insane. And I am not exaggerating when I say that. The people that know, but I'm going to be talking about this because it's taking me so long to heal from it and to understand it, to understand why it happened, why I was the way that I was, why I did the things that I did. And now I feel like I'm finally at peace and there's not as much shame around this topic as there used to be, because when I was doing my episode a few years ago, an episode on this a few years ago, I talked about when I was in a cult, but at that time, it was maybe like 2 years ago, I still felt a lot of shame and embarrassment around this time period in my life. But now I am a lot more at peace. And yeah, there's really no shame in anything that I've done and the mistakes that I made anymore, just because I have a clear point of view and I know why it happened, and I know that it wasn't completely my fault. Do I have to take accountability for a lot of the things that I did? Of course. Yes, I take accountability, and there's still some fragments of shame and embarrassment, but they're very minor. And I think that I don't feel as much shame, more shame than I need to. Like, I don't need to be feeling that much shame, because even though I made a mistake, I'm going on a mini rant. Even though I made a mistake at that point in time, I was very young. I was brainwashed, and I was just a kid, honestly. I was not even really fully an adult at that point. So, yeah. I'm going to be talking about Christianity and what the cult looked like, my upbringing, how I fell into the cult, what it was like after, the mental health issues I dealt with after, the lessons that I learned, and how I'm doing right now and how I feel right now, what I think of Christianity and religion. Yeah, it's going to be a pretty sensitive episode, but like I said, it's going to be juicy. And also, disclaimer, this is my experience. This is what I went through. And this episode's not meant to offend anyone. It's just meant to share a story that I think a lot of people can relate to, because yeah, I know there's people that really need to escape those toxic environments. But yeah, without further ado, let's get this episode started. Okay, so I was raised Catholic. My upbringing was very chaotic. I'm not gonna go too much in depth about my trauma and my childhood, because that's a whole multitude of episodes. That's a whole ass book. So I'm not gonna go into that, but a brief background is necessary just so I can give context, and it can be understood why I kind of fell into the whole cult Christian trap. But yeah, I was raised Catholic, very conservative. I was always told as a child that I needed to be womanly, girly, classy, elegant, that I couldn't be masculine, no sex before marriage. And yeah, I was pretty much on house arrest all the time. My mom would never let me go anywhere. If I went to the movies, which is like the most that I could do, sometimes I was allowed to like be outside in my neighborhood with friends, but not that often. I would be allowed to go to the movies. I would have to go as soon as the movie started and leave as soon as it ended. I couldn't hang out with anybody like before or after. So very strict, very rigid way of living. I had absolutely no liberty, no autonomy. I couldn't really have opinions because if I had an opinion that differed from what I was taught, I would be met with a lot of arguments and just verbal violence. So I couldn't be myself at all. At all. I was trapped. I was imprisoned. And the household that I was raised in, I mean, I just kind of spilled the beans that it was pretty abusive, but that's just the cherry on top. That's just the tip of the iceberg. So as a kid, I mean, I was just confused and completely lost. I had kind of an idea of who I wanted to be and who I was. I was very interested in religions when I entered high school. I would read a lot of books about reincarnation and all these kinds of spirituality. I was just curious and I liked to experiment. So I knew that part. I knew my creative side and what I wanted to do. I just had to keep it all inside. Like I couldn't express anything in my household because there was not going to be any support. And if any, it would have been too stressful. So I had to suppress a lot of things. I was very frustrated as a child. And my only outlets were being online, like being on MySpace. MySpace, when it first came out, I was in heaven. I was in heaven because I could share a thought that I had. I had nobody, even though I had friends, I didn't feel understood and I didn't feel accepted. If anything, I felt like completely rejected and like my mom didn't like me. And I mean, she didn't. And there was just no form. There was just no way for me to express myself. And I only had MySpace and maybe a few friends I could talk to here and there, but it was never anything solid that could build a strong foundation for a mentally sane and stable human being. So yeah, I was very heavily repressed and I had too much of an exposure to conservative Hispanic ideals, Catholicism, all that. My dad is a Christian, I don't know, but at the time he was a Christian. And I remember it was funny to, like, for Mexicans, a lot of Mexicans, especially like Catholic Mexicans, make fun of Pentecostal Christians or just evangelical Christians because of the way that they preach. They're like, en el nombre de Jesús, vamos, el demonio, el chamuco se lo saco. They have like this way of preaching that is so dramatic. It's so fucking extreme. And my mom would make fun of my dad all the time, even though she was pretty like culturally religious, more so than just religious. But because of that, she would make fun of my dad. It was so fucked up. Because you shouldn't make fun of anybody for any religion, like for the religions that they practice. Really, I think that you can make fun of the religion, but you have to watch your audience, watch who you're around. If you respect the person, if they're, you don't want to disrespect anybody that doesn't deserve to be disrespected. But yeah, unwarranted. My mom was always just like drilling his ass on how he was so Christian and whatever. And yeah, I mean, I always had that in my head. And I would also mock just how I mocked the way that they preach. But there was a moment where things changed for me. And I remember exactly how it went down. And this was my conversion story too. I had been going to a few Christian youth groups. I had a Christian friend and I really liked her. I hope she's doing okay. But I had a Christian friend. She would take me to these youth groups. It was pretty healthy. Like, it wasn't anything crazy. We would do, what's it called? Like, we would go to like homeless shelters, and we'd donate stuff. Like, we do really cool community things, which is what I really liked about going to youth group. We would go to the school youth group. That was pretty fun too. I was very open about religions and learning. There was a point where I even went to like a Mormon church and their groups and stuff. I was just open-minded. But my conversion story starts here. I had some decent exposure to Christianity, and one day I was in my room and I was praying. Like, I've always prayed regardless. Even before I was in a cult, just because I had always believed in God. And I was praying and I was saying, I just want a purpose. I want to do something that matters. I want to know the truth about the world and how the world works, and I want to help people. I want to have a real purpose in my life because I feel kind of lost. And at the time, I felt pretty lost because like, I had in middle school, in the beginning of high school, I was clinging on to my dream of moving to LA, and that was my purpose, and that fulfilled me. But the closer I got to graduating high school, the more impossible that my mom made it for me to even think about doing something that I wanted with my life after high school. And it just got harder. Things got harder. And everything that I promised myself when I was 13 that I wouldn't do, which was give up on my dreams, that other people tell me what to do, all that stuff, all that innocence, all of those goals and boundaries that I had set, just vanished as soon as life got tougher. And as I was praying, I was like, what is it? Like, what do I need? I don't know. And I had a Bible next to me, and I was like, this is it. I just randomly chose it. And I started reading that thing, and I was reading the Bible every day, and it's a great book. Like, it's just an amazing piece of literature. So, and it's beautiful. It's incredibly poetic. There's so much range. There's so many types of books in the Bible. So, as a very naive and emotionally unstable and confused 17-year-old, picking up the Bible in one of my most dire moments of need, of emotional support, plus going to the youth group, that was everything to me, and it filled the void temporarily. So I started to take youth group and church more seriously. I was also heavily anti-abortion, and this came before the cult. Like, I was very pro-life because now I realize why I was like that. When I was 13 and 14 were my great years. I feel like I knew the truth of who I was, and I treasure that period in my life a lot. But in that moment, I was forming my political opinions, my spiritual opinions, and I was actually researching a lot of things, like all sides. I had it in my mind that I really wanted to be objective and to be as close to the truth as possible. So I became pro-choice, and because I was on the fence of what I was. So I became pro-choice, and then I remember telling my mom and her boyfriend at the time, who was super conservative, Middle Eastern guy, extremely Catholic, and they just fucking went ham on me. They went crazy. They were just like, they were so mean. Like, they were so mean, which I understand, right? Because I was also telling them about my opinions on gay marriage, gay rights, all that stuff, which was all very liberal, just from my own research, I was being told many different things, because in El Paso, it's both very liberal and also really conservative. And because it's the US, lots of immigrants, but then it's also it's also Hispanic. So I was being fed all kinds of opinions and perspectives, and I had decided that I was pro-gay and pro-choice, and I tell this to them, and they just they just talk all this shit and they're so mean to me, and they are trying to change my opinion. Like, when I tell them, I'm not even trying to change their opinion. I'm just saying this is what I believe, period. And they just wouldn't leave me alone until I changed my opinion. And I didn't in that moment, but my mom just kept drilling me. And once I started getting exposure to the Christian stuff, I just skedaddled back to anti-abortion. And yeah, I became incredibly anti-abortion, and that heightened my exposure to Christianity as well. So in that moment, when I prayed and I was reading the Bible, I became a fundamentalist. I became a religious fanatic. And most of all, I felt like I had a purpose, a real purpose, and I was just so high on it. And also, it was going to church was one of the few things that my mom let me do, at least in the beginning of it. Because when I got too crazy, she was like, whoa, it was too much. But in the beginning, it was one of the few things that I was allowed to do, was go to church. So I could finally go outside. And I was like, oh my God, I can go outside now. So I felt like I had a purpose. I was allowed to go outside more. And it was just this high. And there was a community. There was also a very strong community in these Christian churches and youth groups. So I felt connected to people for the first time. And in the school youth groups, the kids would talk about their families, their experiences, a lot of trauma bonding, a lot of trauma dumping too. So I was getting high on the connection, or on the sense of connection. And that is something that I never really had before. I had never experienced feeling taken care of, feeling emotionally taken care of, other than with my grandpa, but he died when I was 4. So this was just like water when I had been walking through the desert for 17 years. I finally had a sip of fucking water. And I was emotionally vulnerable. Like I was so, because I was just a kid. I was still in high school. It was so easy for me to just follow the emotion and follow the hype and take it like a drug. It felt good, so I'm going to follow it. And I did these are the things that I did at 17 while I was in the cult. I would go to the abortion clinic and protest. I mean, I would do that before, but once I became Christian, I did it a whole lot different. I was way more aggressive in my approach, and I would also preach outside of my high school and pass around like church flyers. And I also heavily isolated myself. I stopped hanging out with all my friends. I think the only good thing that I did in high school at this time was hanging out with the special ed kids during lunch. That was really nice, because I wouldn't really preach to them because I didn't find it appropriate. Thank God at the time I didn't find it appropriate to preach to them. Like I would say like, oh, Jesus loves you and shit like that. But that's fine. That was nothing. So I would just hang out with them because I felt like a lot of these kids just wanted to hang out with the other kids. I would see them in the hallways trying to make an effort to talk to the other kids. So I started hanging out with them, and that was actually really fun. Like I had a lot of fun with them, and their teachers were fucking cunts, dude. I hate those fucking bitches. They were so mean to them. So that's the one good thing that I did, that I was able to be there and have them not spend as much time with trying to get the teacher's attention, because oh my God, like these kids would talk to the teachers, would ask them for something, and then the teachers would just look at them and roll their eyes and ignore them. There was a little girl, and she would always be crying. Like before I started hanging out with them, she would always be crying. Even after, like she would cry, and I'd be like, why are you crying? And she'd tell me, it says, my teachers are so mean. They're so mean. They ignore me all the time, and they tell me to, I start crying, they tell me to suck it up. And dude, oh my God, I hate those fucking cunts. I fucking hate them. But anyway, I preached to them, and I am glad that I did, because those bitches needed to be annoyed. Those bitches needed to not have a fucking good time. So, whatever. But yeah, I think that's the only good thing I did in high school. Other than that, I was pretty fucking insane. And it got worse once I graduated. Once I turned 18 and 19, I experimented with many different churches. I stopped going to the one I was going to in high school. And I just went to another one, and I met some people that were super, super in the church. And the thing is I would meet so many people that were around probably like 5-6 years older, but in their 20s. And they were former drug addicts. They were former something traumatic, and they had terrible childhoods. So we all had something in common. We all had the terrible childhood in common. I felt so connected to them because we would spend so much time together, and we would always be having these deep emotional talks all the time. And it was just so deep, and that's what I craved so much. I just craved depth, and I still do. Now I feel like I'm chilling and I am regulated, but back then I didn't have any creative outlets at all. I wasn't even allowed to have an outlet. So this was everything to me, and things got worse when it just keeps getting worse. It doesn't sound too bad because I'm talking about all these great emotions that I had, but that's how I felt. I felt so ecstatic and high. But yeah, things got significantly worse when I started going to this church in El Paso, this Hispanic church on the east side. I'm not going to say the name because I'm just not going to, but I don't want anything coming back to me from that place. But this place was where it got the cultiest. So fucking culty. I went in already being a hardcore fundamentalist, and I was 19 at the time. I was 18 and then turned 19. So I was on the latter end of being 18, and I go in with my pro-life agenda, and I meet this guy there that is like a leader, and in quotation marks for the people not watching on video. And he is like, whoa, you have a calling, blah, blah, blah. And this guy's also just very brainwashed. Everybody in there was brainwashed. So I don't even want to talk shit about them because they are so unaware of reality. And I get it. When you have nothing good in your life, or when you have very few things to hold you together, and then there's this promise of a happily ever after all of a sudden, and you being loved unconditionally, you take it and you get high off of it. So I get it. But yeah, anyway, this guy, he kind of amplifies me in the church. And no, wait, that's not how it happened. I went to the church because that guy messaged me on Facebook, and he was saying that I had a calling and all this stuff, right? That I lied. That's how it happened. So I went to that church, and then he started, getting me really involved. I ended up preaching at that church, and fun little story about that time that I preached. It was like a Wednesday service, and I was wearing jeans. They weren't tight. It was just they're kind of baggy-ish, and an oversized t-shirt. And I chose that outfit in particular to not draw attention to myself, because I wanted the attention to be on the message. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to wear jeans and a big t-shirt. I pull up to the parking lot, and I get a call from the same guy. And he's like, hey, this is a really weird question, but I have to ask you. What are you wearing? And I'm like, jeans and a big t-shirt. And he's like, I'm so sorry, but the pastor's wife says that you can't wear that. And if you go up there like that, then she's going to kick you out and they're going to kick you out off the stage. And I'm like, what am I supposed to wear? And he's like, you need to wear a skirt, like a big long skirt. And I'm like, but it's about to start. Like I had gotten there early, so I had just a few minutes, right? And even though I was hardcore fundamentalist, I thought this was way too much, but that just paints a picture on how the church functioned. And I was like, I started crying and I'm like, I don't know. Like, I feel like this is so stupid, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, they don't even want a woman preaching. And this, like, you preaching is already too much. So please, like, if you really want to get up there, just get the skirt. So I went to a Ross nearby and I got a big, ugly skirt, wore it, did my preached up in the fucking stage. Hundreds of people watching me. I would also do that. Like, I would preach in front of so many people at churches and events. Crazy stuff. And a lot of older ladies walked away because it was a girl preaching. So that's how hardcore I was. And that church was so insane that that pastor's wife accused me of being a witch. Yeah, she accused me of being a witch, and then she also would get mad. She got mad because it was the cult was not just the church, but it was a group of like, I think 8 people, and it was all couples. And then my friend Lizeth and me, we were the only single girls there, and it was just the rest were all couples. So one time Lizeth and I were talking to 2 of the husbands in the parking lot, and their 2 wives were a few yards away, maybe like 3 yards away. They were super close. Like, we could hear each other's conversations. And we hear through the grapevine that the pastor's wife tells the men to not talk to us, that it is inappropriate and that we're not supposed to be doing that. So that bitch is on her asses. I'm the witch, and then she accuses my friend Liseth of being like what's the term? Like a Mary Magdalene type of woman, right? Like a temptress. So I was a witch and she was a temptress. Yeah, I mean, it was real culty. We would gather every Sunday for church, and then I forgot what day of the week we would gather in one of their houses and have community dinners. Like, it's so crazy because we would pray and everybody else would speak in tongues. I was never able to because that shit's not real. And I believed in it so deeply that I was like, it's supposed to come naturally, and it never did. And everybody fakes it. If there's anybody speaking in tongues, being like, you know, saying all this, like, if there's anybody speaking like that, they're fucking faking it. So yeah, they would speak in tongues, they would pray, and one time we had a hardcore prayer session, and they were expelling all these demons in me, and the main demon that they supposedly expelled, was the demon of homosexuality. So I guess I don't think they expelled that one properly because she's still lingering in there somewhere. But they expelled a bunch of shit. And I just remember that one because when he said it, he was like, yo reprendo el espíritu de homosexualidad. I was like, oop, girl, how'd you know? I was a homosexual? I was shook, bitch. I was so shook. But yeah, anyway, they were reprendiendo all these fucking demons, and it was so culty, it was so insane. And one day, this is how I started to snap out of it. Very weird. I went to one of the youth groups for that church, and dude, Hispanic churches are trifling as hell. They are nosy, gossipy, snaky. They are bad. So I go to one of the groups, right? The youth groups. And everybody's just being a fucking chismosa, like mean, mad dogging people. And I'm thinking, as a Christian still, in my Christian point of view, I was like, this is not godly. Like, this is so messed up. Like, I was just so confused because even though that's usually what I saw in the churches, and I was never really surprised by it because everybody's a sinner or whatever. I don't know why that day it just affected me more, and it made me question, because I always avoided questioning any type when it came to Christianity. But that day was the day that I allowed a question to come in. And the question was, what am I doing here? And that question came from a place of frustration, from a Christian perspective of these people are not godly. But the question was so broad that it made me really ask, what am I doing here in a larger context? So I got in my car, I left early, and I drove home. And as I was driving home, I passed by one of the clubs I used to frequent when I was 18, because I had a summer after the summer after high school. I was not as religious. Like, I was partying and drinking a little bit. So I had a little bit of a break from these 2 years of craziness. And I would go to this club and I would drink and party. And I was passing by it on the freeway. You could see it from the side of the freeway. It was called the Love Nightclub. And I just thought, am I wasting my life? Am I wasting my youth? Because I was 19 at the time. I'm like, I am 19 years old. I could be having fun instead of being in these lame ass fucking Christian youth groups. And I'm like, what am I doing? Am I in the right place? And all these questions just started coming in. And I felt so guilty. Because as a Christian, you're not supposed to question that. You're just supposed to blindly believe in God, have blind faith, and stick with it. So I felt really guilty for that. And I continued. I went on about my days. But I was also in this philosophy class in college. It was an ethics class. And girl, there's nothing that will snap you back into reality more than learning about philosophy. And I thought, like, all these Christians would always tell me, don't take a philosophy class, don't learn about philosophy, don't read any philosophy books, they're demonic, they're from the devil put them on earth so you would question God, right? But I was like, no, my faith is so strong because I'm so righteous, and I'm a true soldier of God, whatever terminology I used to use. I forgot half of it. And so I enrolled in this class, and I was in it. And I was so extreme that I would always contradict the professor and challenge him. So it was a very entertaining class because I was the Christian bitch. I was actually really good at arguing the Bible because I would read it so often and see it from a multitude of perspectives and try to see which was the more logical one. So when I would argue about the accuracy of the Bible with a non-believer, I would actually do a pretty decent job. And I think I still could. If I kind of freshened up on it, I think I still could. That's when I learned that I was so good at shit talking and manipulating and twisting words, because there is almost always some sort of justification if you know how to speak and twist things really well. But at that time, I didn't think I was twisting it. I just thought that I was making a rational argument for the Bible. So I was doing a lot of this back and forth with the philosophy professor, and a lot of religious people, not just Christians, but Mormons, people that practice Islam, Muslims, would go up to me after class and would be like, I'm so glad that you did that, blah, blah, blah. So I would get a lot of praise. But being in that class inevitably made me question my belief in the Bible and Jesus and God. And I was also dating casually this guy that was my friend in high school. Piece of shit guy, by the way. Horrible human being. Deserves to die. But I was seeing this person, and he was a very strong atheist. So I had these influences that were just pushing me to question and question until eventually I snapped out of it. There was something that happened in my body that just snapped. It was like it was like waking up. It was like I was in a dream and suddenly I woke up and I was like, whoa, what the fuck have I been doing? And I looked back at the past 2 years and I said, why did I do that? Where did that come from? And I couldn't answer any of these questions. And I had a few panic attacks just because of questions that I would ask about myself and the universe and the existence of God. It was very rough. So after I snapped out of it, obviously I received a lot of backlash from members of the church. Some of them were DMing me, telling me that I was going to go to hell, to repent. The guy that introduced me to that Hispanic church said that I would be back like the prodigal son and all this fucking bullshit. Well, bitch, it's been 10 years and I am never going back to anything like that. It's crazy. It's so crazy. But anyway, there's a lot of shame, a lot of embarrassment, a lot of depression, PTSD. My PTSD with religious trauma was so bad that if a worship song came out in a restaurant, in a store, in a car, I would just start panicking and I couldn't breathe. And I would get so much anxiety. I would get an anxiety attack and I would feel like I was on the verge of a panic attack. And one of the worst things that I also experienced was people bringing it up. Because El Paso is, even though it's considered a large city, it's pretty small. And everybody knew how I was. And because I also worked at H&M, so I would preach to people at H&M, and they saw me, my coworkers, who were snaky as hell, most of them, saw me in literally the worst time of my life. They saw me enter as a big Christian fanatic and come out as an atheist alcoholic. But yeah, everybody would bring it up, and every time somebody would bring it up, I would freak out, and it would induce a similar type of anxiety that I would feel when the worship music would come out at random times. But it was so bad that I felt like I had to catch up on everything that I had missed out. Like, I missed out on listening to regular music. I didn't listen to the radio or to regular music or to artists in 2 years. I had no idea what songs were out, what artists were new. I had zero knowledge of pop culture. Absolute zero. Because I was so involved in the cult. And I started talking to guys, trying to have sex because I was a virgin. And I actually lost my virginity when I was right at the verge of completely turning atheist. But yeah, like this all happened with the same time frame. Like I was still kind of Christian when I started drinking and having sex and overindulging. But I quickly just snapped out of it. And it was a big relief to no longer be a Christian or a hardcore Christian. But it was also extremely traumatic what I had to deal with afterwards, just the shame and the embarrassment. And because I was so lost and so dysregulated, I had never been more like those 2 times, being a Christian and the post-Christianity moment or period of time in my life, were the most dysregulated that I've ever been. So I put myself in so many different situations within these 2 years. It was crazy. And trigger warning, going to talk about some traumatic things right now. So pause if you need to, skip. But because I was so lost and confused, I ended up getting essayed for the first time, sexually assaulted, and I attempted suicide. I was just in the pits of hell. And it was so frustrating because I had been depressed before. My first time experiencing depression, I was probably like 3 or 4 years old. First time considering suicide, I was 8. So depression wasn't new to me, but this time it was different because I felt nothing. I didn't just feel sad, I felt numb. And I was really frustrated that I couldn't even feel angry or sad. So the only emotion I could feel was frustration from the numbness. So I thought it's better to die. Like, I'm already dead. I would rather die. So all that happened, and obviously the attempt was not successful. I just took like a handful of painkillers, like pretty much a whole bottle almost. But I guess they were low milligram because I woke up like maybe a day and a half, like more than 24 hours later, I woke up. But I slept for over 24 hours, probably like 30 or 40, I'm thinking. I lived with my mom, and it's crazy how she didn't even notice. Like, I was just in my room, and she was so overbearing. But if I was indoors, I could live. Like, as long as I didn't go outside, she wouldn't be overbearing. But if I was just locked in my room 24/7 for the rest of my life, she would be happy. Like a caged animal, right? So she didn't even notice. Nobody noticed. I didn't tell anybody. And it took years. It took years for me to heal. And I was really committed to healing and to feeling better. And in the midst of doing a lot of destructive things, I started listening to regular music. I started trying to make regular friends. There was nothing I wanted more than to be normal, than to not have a purpose. And I just wanted to be a regular person. And this was so out of character for me, but I had fallen so deep into this cult that I just wanted stability. So I had a lot of healing moments, and I want to name a few of them. This is going to sound funny, but one of the most healing things that I experienced was raving. And I raved for the first time in 2015. I saw Dioro and Zed, and I did ecstasy for the first time there. And I swear, when I did ecstasy, and I don't endorse doing drugs or anything like that. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think drugs should just be respected, whatever that means to you, whether you do it in moderation, once in a while, or not at all. But I wanted to experiment. I wanted to see what the regular world was like. So I went to this rave. I went with a classmate that ended up becoming a good friend of mine. Shout out to Andrew. And I did ecstasy for the first time. And I felt for the first time in a long time. I had feelings again. I felt happy for a moment. And I was like, whoa, it's possible. It's possible to not be numb. And even though it only lasted in that moment, that helped me so much because I had hope that it was possible for me to achieve having emotions again and feelings again. That was an extremely healing moment. Listening to regular music, rejoicing in that was great. I loved it. I went to EDC in 2016, and one of the most fun times I've ever had. It was great. I also did a lot of activities like yoga. I went hiking. I danced. I also did dance. So I was doing a lot of physical things, that were healthy for me. A lot of unhealthy stuff too, but the healthy ones just helped tremendously. But most of all, the most healing thing was that I was committed to having resilience and being strong and getting better. Even though it was really hard, and it still is because I still suffer from a lot of PTSD, and my healing journey is just pretty much never ending. The commitment that I've made to my life and to being happy and to treasuring myself has made all the difference. And now, thank God, I'm the happiest I've ever been. I realized this yesterday. I was in the restroom washing my hands, and I was like, damn, this is the happiest I've ever been, because this is the healthiest I've ever been in every sense of the word. But I learned a lot of lessons. Let me conclude, because I thought this was going to be a shorter one, but it's not. It's not a shorter episode. I learned a lot of lessons. The main lesson that I learned, or the first lesson that I learned, was that a lot of churches and all cults prey on the young and emotionally vulnerable. They like to take people that are extremely traumatized and have dark pasts and give them a community. But this community is just as toxic, if not worse, than like where they came from. But I realized that I was starved for affection, for attention, for unconditional love, for community, for relationships. So when all of that was being supposedly handed to me on a platter, I was like a starved child. I just needed to eat. And yeah, they will do this, and they'll prey on the vulnerable. And it's really, really sad, especially for young people, because people waste years of their lives in cults and in religious organizations. It's really sad. There's this documentary on, I think it's on Netflix. It's either on Netflix or on Max, on HBO Max. But it's called Shekinah. And it's about this church in LA, like in the Valley. And it's a Christian church too, but it's culty. It's a cult. And there were so many fucking similarities to what I experienced. I think theirs is worse because it was more organized, and the leader of it was smarter and had he had a plan. He had money as the motive. So I think my cult actually genuinely believed that God was all these things and all these beliefs. So there was an innocence to it, to my experience. But in that one, it was just outright evil. So bad. And yeah, I mean, a lot of people use religion as a coping mechanism because it helps them cope with their past, and it makes them feel wanted and loved. And it brings peace to some extent. Just even the knowledge of like, oh, God loves me unconditionally. I am a treasure to him. That is enough of a fix. That's taking a painkiller for your PTSD, for your past. And another lesson that I learned later on was that I learned this years later, but ended up learning it, is that this was just the result of my shitty ass upbringing. It shed a light on how much trauma I had actually dealt with, because all my life, whenever people would ask, oh, like, how was your childhood? Did you have a good childhood? I would always be like, oh yeah, my childhood was good. I don't think I would ever say great, but I was like, it was good. Like I had a decent childhood. I had good parents. Like my mom's really good. So having been susceptible to something so traumatic like a cult made me question why I would even fall into that in the first place. So as I've been questioning that throughout the years and going to therapy, I'm like, oh, it's because I was already traumatized. I needed love and affection. I had been abused, and this was a safe haven for me. This was a quick escape. And the feeling of affection and love after being starved for it all my life was everything. So I know I keep being redundant about that, but it's important to emphasize because that's the truth. I also learned how important it is to forgive myself. And again, I didn't learn this until later on. Probably I learned this maybe like a few years ago. The latter lessons I learned here in LA. But I learned how to forgive myself, how to not function in shame. And that's been very healing. Just removing all the embarrassment and the shame, the feelings of shame. I feel so much better. Like I feel relieved and I feel healed because years ago, if somebody were to bring up this point in time in my life, I would freeze up and freak out and feel like I'm gonna panic. And now I could even step foot in a church, I think, and I think I'd be fine. Like I'm pretty unfazed by it, but that's because of all the work that I've been doing for the past decade. I also learned that I'm bipolar, or at least I'm diagnosed bipolar. I don't know how true this is, but I take it with a grain of salt. But I was diagnosed with bipolar 2, and religious psychosis is a big symptom of being bipolar. So, yep. But in conclusion, I am still spiritual. I believe in God. In fact, I've been praying recently. Not all the time. I kind of just pray whenever I really feel it. And I believe in astrology and tarot and all that cool stuff. But I'm not that invested. And I know that I believe in it because it makes me feel good. And it's a very feminine belief. It's ancient. I like what it's done for me and how healing it was. Like that was also very healing. So I went from atheist to agnostic and then to spiritual. And I stuck with spiritual. But I promised myself that I was never going to get fanatic again about anything. So yeah, I've been pretty spiritual and it feels good. And I don't really care if I'm wrong or right. Like I don't think about it much, honestly, other than when I think it serves me. So yeah, I mean, I'm just here to live in the moment and to be happy and to be with the people that I love and that love me back. That's at this point, like, that's just really all I want. Like, I just want a peaceful life where I am creating art and loving and being loved by the people in my life. That's it. That's all I want, and I have that. I have that already. There's some stress factors in my life that I'm working on, but I have everything that I need, and that's why I feel like I've never been happier. My big takeaways are that life needs to be flexible, that your mind and your heart need to be flexible, that there's many perspectives out there. There's many ways of viewing life. There's always, usually, in most situations, so many solutions. There's not just one answer. Nothing is black and white. And things can be fixed. And there is nothing better than working on your growth and your mental health, even in the midst of chaos. I don't regret working on my mental health. I'm still working on it. I'm so heavily traumatized that it's taken I really started consciously working on getting better when I was at rock bottom, which was when I was 19. So it's been a decade of digging myself out of that hole, like of climbing up and trying to get out of the hole. And there's still a lot of, even though I'm the happiest I've ever been, I still dissociate a lot. I'm dissociated so much of my life, and I still feel numb in a lot of ways, and that is probably my biggest burden. So I'm still working on that. I'm being patient. I'm going to therapy. Things have gotten better, and they are getting better now more rapidly. So I have a lot of hope, and I have a lot of optimism of how my life is going to go, because I can proudly say that I have created a beautiful life for myself, and that I know my worth, and I know the worth of my loved ones, and I know who belongs in my life and who doesn't. I'm so sure of that. I feel like I don't know. It's a really strange feeling because I got here despite all the odds, despite the traumatic childhood, despite being always surrounded by terrible people, despite never really being loved. I didn't really experience love up until my friendships and my baby brother and then now my boyfriend, and it's like, wow, as a child you're supposed to experience that from the moment you're born. So I'm very proud to where I've gotten, because I don't know how. I know how. It's through my work, but it's like climbing up a mountain, and then you get to the top and you get a view of everything, and it's absolutely breathtaking. And you're like, how the fuck did I get up here? And you know how. You were climbing, but damn, it's a lot. It's a lot to take in for sure. So, yeah, I'm really happy now. I know I've said that a million times, but I am. And I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I know it was a little bit more on like the mellower side, the not as happy, not as jokey side, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. I am sweating so much. I don't know if you can see through the camera, because if I turn on my AC, it might be heard through the mic. So I turn off my AC, and it's so hot in LA. It's so fucking hot. So if you can see me sweating on camera, just don't mind me. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Follow me on social media at Amy Savalsa on Instagram, and at Salsa666 with 2 Z's on TikTok. Bye.